Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie again with the patient story for our third and final video for this interview or this conversation with Dave. And Dave, now we get to dive into your passion and what you've dedicated your life to now. First, I want to ask, how did you make the shift from being a lung cancer patient and then survivor to advocate?
That's a great question. And in my case, it was actually it was transformative, to me because I bet my background was finance and sales and marketing. Had been working at the Bank of Ireland, and after I recovered, everything kind of changed. My life changed because I said I need to do something that I'm passionate about, and so I started working in medical marketing at a publishing company to provide patient education materials to cancer patients. Because again, going back to being treated at Mass General Hospital and being from a place in Minnesota with relatives, who live in rural parts of Minnesota, I felt that every person should have access to the same level of care. And so that, because I just literally felt that I wanted to change my career path because I was so profoundly impacted by the cancer experience that I started to become more active. Now, I wasn't super active right at the beginning about sharing my story, which is kind of an interesting part of my journey because I for many years didn't want to be, wearing it on my sleeve or feeling like I think I kind of felt almost guilty about the fact that I had such a positive outcome, and many people didn't have positive outcomes. Even people like in the room that I was in when I first got to my hospital room at Mass General, I shared a room, and I was hearing the conversations in the bed next to me, and it was bad. So, but it really, there's my buddies. It really shifted my thinking that I wanted to be in healthcare. I wanted to be involved with patient advocacy, and then I ended up working at the National Foundation for Cancer Research, which was where I really decided to get more active in the community. I started writing a blog, and I started becoming active on Twitter and meeting some of the people that, like you see in this photo, who are fellow advocates of mine. But it really was because of the experience and because emotionally I just wanted to make a difference. And I felt like if I could make a difference and make a living doing it, that's what I would do. And I couldn't just go back to just doing work that didn't seem, not that it wasn't important, but it didn't seem important to me anymore.
Oh my
To
gosh, yes.
be, selling investment services products, to small businesses, which is what I was doing.
Right, right. No, I understand personally that shift too, right? It's like it's different calling that happens. You know, I want to relate this advocacy work back to people who are watching and reading this, who are patients, caregivers, people like that. Advocacy work, what does that mean? So you and your buddies, is it about, hey, we need to get patients to understand treatment options? Is it, let's get more research funding? What does it mean?
Well, this photo is a good example. The way I look at advocacy, and I think many of us within the community, we feel like everybody has their lane, right? Every advocate has what they think is their calling, their purpose, their mission, and it's going to be different for every person. So for some people, advocacy might be, you know, raising awareness that anybody can get lung cancer, right? It's not just a smoker's disease. Others might be advocating for themselves because I'm in a clinical trial and I want to make sure that I have access to trials. Or like Janet Freeman Daly, she's a scientist, and so her lane is to like make sure that she can educate patients on the latest scientific findings. Or Chris Draff, who's like, everything, we're on this together, right? We need to shout from the mountaintops about lung cancer and the good things that are happening. So I think I think patient advocate is a broad category that gets a lot of attention now because it could be advocating for access to clinical trials or diversity in clinical trials or gender equity in cancer treatment. You know what I mean? So there's so many different ways to think of advocacy, all with the mission, but the end goal of making sure patients get good care
Right.
and good outcomes, right?
Right, absolutely. And that work can never be done. I mean, it's like never finished. There's just always more to do. And so thank you and your friends for doing it. I want to, we can kind of go through this, not rapid fire, but sort of high level, because I think it would just be great to get the message out there to patients and caregivers now about the different things you just talked about. So on the high level, like clinical trials, how should patients and caregivers be thinking about that? And same with the targeted therapies. I know there's been so many advancements recently, and so there are more treatment options, and maybe it's the suggestion that people should ask for genetic testing or make sure they understand their marker information or mutation information. So I'll leave it open-ended to you, but what are some of those high-level messages you want to get across?
Boy, there's so much there to unpack. It's a lot of good stuff. And I think, we talk about targeted treatments, as an example, so you have your diagnosis and you have your staging, you have this conversation with your physician on, what type of cancer do you have, right? Is it non-small cell lung cancer? Is it small cell lung cancer? And, within that, you should, one of the focuses of my advocacy work is I believe that every patient, should have access to genomic testing, because now there are tests. There are 7 biomarkers, for example, in non-small cell lung cancer, meaning a biomarker. There's a mutation that's identified through a genomic test, EGFR, ROS1, KRAS, whatever. And there are targeted treatments that are available for those. And so that means like taking a pill, not taking chemotherapy, right? So but I think even thinking before that is to really, how do you get the information, to know that, to ask these kinds of questions about treatment options and clinical trials is, first of all, you have to be your own advocate. And if you're not your own advocate, considering it could be your spouse or a friend or whatever, you have your self-advocacy where you have to go find the information. Now, luckily, there's a lot of information out there, right? So first of all, you have your care team. So you're going to get information from your care team, and hopefully they'll be helping to give you options of whatever. So, don't go to clinicaltrials.gov and try to figure that out by yourself, because that's that, right? So, but what you can do is, once you have your diagnosis and understanding, if you first of all think to ask for a genomic test, or hopefully someone will recommend that you ask them, can I have access to a genomic test to find out if there is. There might not be, but if there is, or there might be a mutation that doesn't have a treatment, like KRAS, right? So but with those 7 biomarkers now, targeted therapies, boy, that's a game changer. And that's why I think everybody should have access to it, because if you don't, as your patient, that's not fair. So there are people within the lung cancer community, particularly nowadays online, where you can connect with people who have the same diagnosis as you do. And I'll give you an interesting example. There's a few examples on lung cancer social media. They're on Twitter, for example. Many of us in the community use a hashtag called LCSM. It's hashtag lung cancer social media. And that's how I've met tons of people who are, patient advocates and patients and clinicians and researchers. But within LCSM, there are also groups that are forming around specific mutations. There are something called the EGFR resistors, or the KRAS kickers, or the ROS wonders. You can put out there, if you are inclined to do so, what you have, and you can find people who have the same diagnosis that you, or similar diagnosis that you do. And that's where I think you can get a tremendous amount of information, whether it's about clinical trials, whether it's about treatment options, should I go to community, should I go there? Boy, that support network is so important. And so I really encourage people to think about that when you're doing searches for your particular situation online, to consider tapping into those resources and just reaching out to those people, because they will respond. I guarantee they will respond. If you say, I have stage 4, metastatic lung cancer, got EGFR exon mutation, you will find people who will respond to you if you just reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the community is incredible. We always say it's the club we didn't sign up for, but once you're part of it, it is just intensely supportive. So I couldn't agree with you more there. And I'm hoping that the patient story can actually get these detailed stories like yours, up on the site to sort of democratize access too, so that even though these people will respond, people will have a place to go just to be able to see what that person went through, right? It's exactly that. Someone who was diagnosed with the same cancer, same stage, same mutations, that can be really helpful for folks. Um, you mentioned another part of your advocacy, and I know it's the stigma, right? So the stigma of lung cancer being one where it's the smoker's cancer and all this stuff. I remember growing up with all the ads too, and there was a lot we were inundated with. Not to say that it's not true that smoking causes lung cancer, but there's just such a huge population too, and we're learning more and more where it's the never smokers or non-smokers. What is that feeling, and what's the pushback? What's the campaign? What are people talking about, and why is it so important?
I think within the lung cancer community, the stigma is something that I think it bothers all of us to a certain degree, some more than others. And not to say that people who smoke deserve to have cancer. So I'm always sensitive to that as well. But because now it's estimated that 20% of people who get lung cancer are non-smokers, never smokers, or people that smoked, a long time ago, but didn't smoke a lot. So if 20% of the patients are getting diagnosed are non-smokers, it doesn't seem right that somebody should ask you if you smoked. And that's what happened. It happened to me. It happens to everybody. It's like the first thing people do is say, well, did you smoke? It's like, well, smoking is implicated in a lot of cancers. But so when somebody gets breast cancer, you don't ask them if they smoked, but that could have been one of the factors. So the stigma, when we talk about the stigma, it's because of those years of those campaigns, right? Of those anti-smoking campaigns. The message was, how do you not get lung cancer? Well, just don't smoke and you won't get lung cancer. Well, that's not true. You can. If you have lungs, you can get lung cancer. So that's the current messaging around people who are advocating for a lot of the people who are really active, is talking about the fact that anybody can get lung cancer. It happened, by the way, I've read that of the non-smokers that are getting diagnosed with lung cancer, a lot of them are much younger, and 2/3 of them are women. And so, there's issues around that as well, as how do we kind of be aware of that, So I think it's really, that's what the stigma is. It's some people talk about, the inequity in research funding, thinking that, well, maybe lung cancer research doesn't get as much attention because it's a smoker's disease, and things like that.
Absolutely. Actually, that's a great point, right? I've heard that before too. It's this lack of attention and funding because there's less empathy almost, because people think of the smoking campaigns. And like you said, it's not that smokers deserve it either, but there's this other thing that's added to the perception that makes it tougher maybe to get the attention that lung cancer research and fundraising needs and deserves.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll give you a number that will put it into perspective, is that if 200,000 people get diagnosed with lung cancer every year in the US, or let's say 150,000 die of lung cancer. So if 20% of that 150,000 is 30,000 people, that's a big number, right? So even if it's only 20%, it's 20% of a very big number.
Right.
So it ranks up there as a very prominent number of people in that category, of non-smokers.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine having to, you're not only diagnosed with it, then you have to go through all these others, you have to deal with the stigma on top of it. So yeah, we'll help, get that message out there too. It's interesting. I talked to another lung cancer survivor recently, and he was talking about that as well. And he said the same thing you did. It's a very complicated sort of issue in that it's not that you're saying smokers deserve it. It's just you don't want any of it attached to the lung cancer.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Dave. I just have a couple more questions and I'd love to open it up to you. I did bring up, and I'll bring up the picture again, but I love grassroots campaigns. And I love it when it's like you had mentioned, you described it as unbranded, but you've got it on your wall, right? So I'd love for you to talk about the White Ribbon Project and what that means and why patients and caregivers and others should care about it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks. This just happened a couple months ago, actually in October, a few months ago, that based upon what we were just talking about, we're talking about the stigma, right? We're talking about people who maybe are not smokers. There I am. There was a couple in Colorado, Pierre and Heidi Onda, who she has stage 3 lung cancer, and she, was trying to let people know, because people were saying, they didn't know that she had lung cancer, and people were asking if she smoked and whatever. So she wanted to kind of, first of all, just change the perception and so she was like frustrated, like, how can I do something, to let people know I have lung cancer? So her husband is a primary care doctor, and he's a craftsman. So he has a workshop in his basement. So she's, I wish I could just put a ribbon on the front door. He says, I can make you a ribbon. And so he made the ribbon, and that's the ribbon. And well, first of all, white ribbons are representative of Lung Cancer Awareness Month. But she said, well, what if we did this year round? What if we didn't just focus on the month? And so we crafted this thing out of wood, out of plywood, painted it by hand. And the long and short is, what happened is I caught wind of it. Some other people caught wind of it, because people started asking her, can you make me one? And so it started popping up, and it reminded me of the Humans of New York project, where it was the faces of lung cancer, right? This is the modern face of lung cancer. And so we started taking photos at the places that we got treated, at our cancer centers, and with other friends and other companies, biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, and really to try to be active on social media to say, number one, anybody with lungs can get lung cancer, and let's change the perception of the public perception of lung cancer as a disease, right? And so it's a grassroots effort where we're just going to be out there. And so far, Pierre and Heidi have made almost 400 ribbons by hand. And again, you can see it on my wall. It's a wooden ribbon, 1/4-inch plywood. And so it's made with care, and that's the story. Stephanie, you're a storyteller. That's the story. The reason that it's got me. It's like people from coast to coast and in Canada that are asking for ribbons, and it's oncologists are contacting us. Can I get a ribbon and we want to put them on display, and we'll have this conversation. So we can continue to have this conversation about lung cancer, which we think will lead to more potential research funding because of the fact that we're telling this story. And it's not branded, meaning it's not attached to any one nonprofit organization. It's just us advocates out there who care. And it's not just patients, by the way. It could be someone who, my cousin died of lung cancer, or I knew someone at work that had lung cancer. It's so similar to the HIV campaigns years ago, or the breast cancer campaigns that become, really grassroots movements. That's what we're doing in lung cancer right now.
That's awesome. I love it. I love that it just picked up, and you and other people in the community then also took it and ran with it. And now it's just like spreading like a wildfire. I mean, that's great. Maybe we can get a collage going. I don't know if you know people who could send me their photos, and I'll put it up on the patient story to spotlight it. Because again, I love that it's done by people. It wasn't like a marketing idea. It was just, I just want to do this. So fantastic. My last question to you, and then I'll leave it open to you to just make a plug for your podcast, because I know you launched it a couple months ago. But is there anything else in your years working as an advocate that you think are really frequently asked questions or frequently shared tips by you to patients and caregivers of lung cancer, things that people you think should just know about in general when they get diagnosed with lung cancer?
I would say, from when I got treated to now, I think that there's a lot more hope now than there was 20 years ago. It's a scary diagnosis, and particularly if you're diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4, particularly stage 4. But I do know people who are living more than 10 years beyond a lung cancer diagnosis, stage 4 metastatic disease. So there's a lot of hope and optimism out there. So I think emotionally that's something to be thinking about, but also the journey of finding support, finding a team that you're comfortable with, finding other people who have had a similar experience. Those to me are the most important things that you can do, to get through, the initial shock of getting lung cancer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've heard too, people even diagnosed with metastatic stage 4, talking about it as living with cancer as like a chronic illness almost, as opposed to, thinking of it the way people did before. Because as you said, the expectancy is different. People are continuing to live longer, especially given the new therapies out there. So I hear a message of hope. And on that note, I know you're trying to spread more of a message. And so you quit your job from before, you decided to take on a different day job, and then also start a podcast. Talk to us about where we can find the podcast and what people can find when they tune in.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. So the podcast is called The Research Evangelist, and you can find it at at researchevangelist.com, or you can find it on wherever you find your podcasts, on Apple or Spotify or wherever. The background of the podcast was, as you mentioned, I wanted to become more vocal. I have been writing a blog, The Cancer Research Evangelist, for many years, but I wanted to use my voice, my spoken voice. And I've decided to interview people in life sciences who are brilliant but not famous. That's kind of the message. So I'm interviewing a lot of people in research, so whether they're basic researchers, they're oncologists, they're both, they're doing clinical trials, people who are just doing amazing work. There'd be a lot of focus on lung cancer and precision medicine in lung cancer, and what are genomic testing in lung cancer, and really highlighting people that I want to tell their stories so that they can connect with these people, because they might be at Mass General Hospital, they might be at the University of Wisconsin, they might be at UCLA, they might be at UCSF, or they might be in a community setting, they might be at the West Clinic, or they might be at Tennessee Oncology. And so it's a positive message, and the name is because evangelist, the Greek meaning of evangelist, is bringing the good news, and I'm a very optimistic person, and so my goal and my mission is to introduce these fascinating, amazing people who are doing good work. And it came from when I got recognized by the Mass General Cancer Center in 2016 as the cancer research evangelist. So I'm super excited about it. We're only 2 months in, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback about it. So hopefully people can find it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure we're going to post Dave's entire story on thepatientstory.com, and I'll put the link and everything out there, but we'll link to the podcast or where they can find it so they can tune in and hear from these. I love it. The brilliant minds, but maybe not famous, because we know we have a lot of untapped knowledge out there. So that's wonderful.
Well, it's funny because when I say brilliant but not famous, like some of them are famous as in their world, like Narges Duma. She's a Latina medical oncologist at the University of Wisconsin. Everyone that the lung cancer community knows her.
Right.
But if I went to my next door neighbor and said, "Hey, you ever heard of Narges Duma?" He'd be like, "No."
Who?
So
Right. Right. You want to get her name out there instead of, like, say, Kim Kardashian, no offense, but it's like, let's get those names to get really the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah, because maybe you can support their lab and support their work, or maybe you can contact her and find out what she thinks of the latest treatments. I mean, these people are receptive and they're brilliant. Many of them, many people don't think that you could actually contact a lung cancer researcher and actually have a conversation with them. Like you actually can.
Yes, you can. And there's the access, and you're highlighting it. So
yeah.
I appreciate that, Dave. And I really enjoyed talking to you today. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the near future. I'd love to see how the advocacy work's going, the White Ribbon Project, your podcast with the Research Evangelist. And it was lovely having you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It was great to meet you, and I appreciate having me on your show. And I'll be watching you as well. You're doing good work, so keep up the good work of what you're doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And again, everyone, we'll post Dave's story in full at thepatientstory.com.